do the roll call, please.
Okay, Mr. Murphy?
Here.
Mr. Rubini?
Here.
Mr. Kent?
Here.
Chairman Lyons?
Here.
Let the record show that the town manager and the town attorney are also present.
Minutes of the past regular meeting, any comments? Can I have a motion, please?
Sorry.
I did have one piece which will be back in the discussion on page, or would be the third page to the last, just because in the meeting we did bring up including the north-south districts and along with the core and fossil delay in the discussion. And I just thought that would be, if we just included that someplace, maybe under.
I'll put it in.
Somewhere under section dash 74, that discussion. But just to include the north-south districts in the core and fossil delay. North-south is this.
Thank you, Mr. Kent.
Do we have a motion as amended?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes with the amendments as presented.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Rubini?
Aye.
Mr. Kent?
Aye.
Chairman Lyons?
Yes. On meetings, for the November and December meetings, Rita and I just spoke. I propose that we do November 19th, Thursday before Thanksgiving. And in December, do the Thursday of December 17th, because the next week a lot of people travel for Christmas week. So if you're not going to be able to make that meeting, obviously we have many months before we arrive there, but let Rita know, please. Okay.
Could we have a motion
Well, that's
for
true.
those dates?
I'll make a motion for this one.
All right.
Second.
Okay. Mr. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Rubini?
Aye.
Mr. Kent?
Aye.
Chairman Lyons?
Yes. Okay.
Well, right now, do we have any meetings, do we have anything on for July?
Yeah.
Are we gonna have?
Well, that's a good, I'm glad you, I will be here. I'll be in Southampton, but I will be here. When I leave.
I'm not sure I know what the question
I'm
is.
here.
Oh, are you going to be here for the meeting in July?
On the
The
23rd.
July 23rd meeting's coming up, and there are agenda items.
If
You
there's
know,
10 items, I'll be here.
I don't think I'll be here,
Okay.
but we have a quorum.
I believe Mr. Smith will be here when I spoke to him yesterday. But just kindly let Rita know in advance when you know you're definitely not going to be coming. Okay? Thank you. Okay. Any ex parte discussions?
No?
Okay. Rita, why don't we swell? Swell.
Do you think everyone does?
I've been saying next to
It's working its way.
Swear in our guest, please.
Anyone that's going to speak, just swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes. So why don't we start with the first application, which would be by Ladani Seaside Builders for Mr. and Mrs. James. Can you pronounce the last name, please?
Cassiopo.
Yes, you. Thank you.
All right. If some of you don't know me, I'm Jennifer Snyder from Richard Jones Architecture, and I'm going to go over 3140 Polo Drive. You can see that the property, where this property is located, is on Polo Drive. It is in between Palm Way and Mill Road, and it has direct intercoastal access. So the box highlighted in red right there will be the property that we're going to develop on. Right there is the survey. This is how the lot is going to be. We have a fairly large lot that we're working with, and this is how it's going to be divided. You can see that, again, it's on Polo Drive, and it's about like 75, 80 feet from Palm Way. This is the site plan that we're developing. We're proposing for a two-story home, but the majority of the house is a one-story house. Once I get to the elevation, I'll kind of explain the two-story part. We're asking for 8,560 gross total area. That includes the loges and garages and the total square footage of the house. We're proposing for a 3-car garage, and one of the additional garage bays will be for a golf cart, so it's a smaller kind of garage bay. We have motor court that is along the front of the house. I don't know if you can see that. And then motor court on the side of the house, and a driveway across the front of the house. And then there's going to be a large pool in the back with some arbor elements to the rear of the property. This is the landscape plan, which Dave Bacher is going to talk a little bit more about, but you can see the client has actually, with Bacher's help, handpicked every tree, and there's going to be a lot of landscape on, especially the front and the side of this property. And then we don't have as much landscape, obviously, in the rear to, so that we don't block the views of the Intercoastal, but there will be heavy landscape on this property. This is our site data chart that we provided. We're going to be a Georgian style home. We, if you look in the chart, we meet and exceed the setback requirements for all of the sides, including on the north side of the property. We actually exceed the setbacks by an additional 8 feet. And towards the rear of the property, because this is on the Intercoastal, we're allowed to go to the 30-foot mark. But the majority of our house is almost set back 50 feet from the Intercoastal. So we almost meet the requirements of the 50 feet. And the second floor is obviously set back 50 feet. So this is the floor plan. You can see on the rear of the property, we've incorporated 2 covered terrace areas to these loges on the back to take full advantage of the Intercoastal views. Starting from the left, if you read over, the majority of the house in the front, surrounding the front door, is very symmetrical, and I can kind of show you the rendering as I go through it, but this is going to come up in the end. But you can see this, from here to here, this part of the house is very symmetrical. It's got the front door in the middle with the gable ends, and then the 2 flanking sides. And then through here, this is where we're going to access the mudroom, and it's going to have lattice work and metal wires that kind of treat this area a little bit different, and then this will be the 2-story portion of the house right there. So it has a symmetrical front entry, like I just explained. Inside, we're going to have ample ceiling heights. The client was very instructive of telling us that in these main rooms, like the living room, dining room areas, the inside of the space, they wanted to have some volume, not just the lower ceilings, but so we're going to build them up into the trusses, and that's one reason why we wanted to keep the majority of the house at 1 story. This is the second floor. You can see that the second floor has a minimal, 22 feet of the second floor is on the right-of-way or on Polo Drive, so not very much of it is facing the right-of-way. You can see almost 90% of the house is going to be 1 story, and then there's only going to be 22% of it along Polo Drive. We chose on the 2-story portion to break up, we had a balcony off the front to break up the volume, break down the mass of that 2-story portion. And even the heights that we're choosing for the ceiling, we're not even going with the 10-foot beam height for the second floor. We're actually bringing it down to like, I think 9.6, to also give not such a massive feel of the second floor. And then also the neighbors that are going to be to the north are the same owners of this property. So that's again why we chose to kind of put the 2-story portion over there, because they're the ones that own that property and it's less impact to the whole neighborhood. So this is the elevation that you can see in 2D. We're in old school Georgian style. I mean, we follow a lot of the characteristics that I see driving around in a lot of these Gulfstream houses, the white roofs, the shutters. We have the 2 flanking chimneys that are on the elevation. Again, there's going to be, in that mudroom access point, there's going to be metal cables with vegetation growing up it. But we really think that this house complements the other streets in the area, or the other houses in the area, and would be a great addition to Gulfstream. And this is it looking from the north side and the south side. And so even over the garage, we're choosing to do brackets and arbor elements. Again, kind of adding more detail to that north elevation. We have a fireplace that you can see on the north elevation that kind of uses kind of an anchoring point. And it's important to note that even in the rear, the house steps down from the 2-story to a 1-story. So along that area, there's not going to be any 2-story elements. We have arched transoms over a lot of the doors in the rear, and our roof overhangs will be very minimal. And we're going to have copper gutters. Again, a lot of the windows are very symmetrical in shape, trying to stay with the symmetry, and very repetitious of the window kind of patterns and styles. And that's the presentation. If you have any questions, or you would like Bodker to explain more of the site plan, please let me know.
Should we, why don't you go over the landscaping, and then we can, so I think you need to look at the house in the context of that landscaping.
Sure.
Good morning, my name is Dave Bodker. As Jennifer mentioned, the clients had a lot of input into this house, and they wanted an old Florida style or Bermuda style, using those type of materials. So the majority of the hardscapes cut coral, and I have a sample of it here if you'd like me to pass it around. It's pretty heavy, but it's a material that's been used a lot in Gulfstream, and I have pictures of other locations in the town.
Well, you can just hold on, I don't think we need to pass it around.
Everybody pretty much knows what this is. I
So you don't want your workout?
Thank you.
Additionally, there's some photographs here, if you wouldn't mind passing them along, of examples of where cut coral's been used in the town here. The driveway is going to be that cut coral material. It'll probably need to be put on a slab as it's kind of soft, so it'll be mud set. This driveway as well will be cut coral. We're proposing that there's random cut coral pathway leading from the motor court in the front of the house to the side yards on either side. And these 2 side yards are very heavily vegetated, especially this one, so that we're screening the 2-story portion of the house from the road pretty extensively. The owner almost wanted a jungle look in the front here, so we have very high palm trees. It's similar to what's shown in the elevation there, but I don't know if you can see this from there, but across the front of the house are these 35-foot, 40-foot high coconut palms all the way across. But in addition to that, we're proposing a banyan tree here and queen crepe myrtles on either side here and here, and then a strangler fig here, so older native plant material. we've proposed on our plan 20-foot high banyan tree or strangler figs, but our hopes are that we can find a collected piece that's even bigger than that. The pool deck also will be cut coral. It's a vanishing edge pool, it's 70 feet long. And at either end, we're proposing an arbor. So another older Florida element, and it'll be covered with bougainvillea. So our hopes are that when you have a lounge there, you know, your head will be covered, or the head of the chair will be covered by an arbor on either end to provide some shade. As the grade drops off here, if you look at the plans, we have these diminishing steps that kind of fade into the grade on either side here, so that there's a lawn area on either side. Excuse me. On either side of the property, we're proposing fishtail palms to provide screening, and especially on this side where the two-story portion is, we're not only proposing the fishtail palms, but Alexander palms, that the head of the Alexander palms will come up through those fishtail palms and provide additional screening. So I think you have these in your packet. But if you can see here, all this dark area here is the fishtail palms at the lower level and the Alexander palms higher.
What's the two large trees on the west side of the driveway? Yes.
Right here. Rusty figs. They're in the ficus family, but they're probably the Cadillac of that family of tree. You seldom see them used, so it'll be a collected item. But it's something the owner specifically requested. They're very dense and provide a lot of shade there. And they see this area as a play area for their kids.
And how tall will they get?
Well,
what will they be?
lifetime 40 feet or something like that.
Sorry?
In their lifetime at maturity, 40 feet, somewhere in there.
And how high will they be when they plant? You think?
The biggest we can find. What did we specify? Let's see.
The number's always too small for me to read.
It's, we specified 20-foot height.
Okay.
So we'll have to look for those two trees. There's a number of collected pieces we're trying to get for this particular.
And then on the, let me see if I get this right, the southwest corner, there's
Here.
an existing, I think it's a mango tree.
It's actually an avocado tree.
Okay.
It's a great tree.
I was close.
It exists right here, and our intention is to move it.
Meaning you will leave it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been protected. I mean, that lot's been cleared already. And the tree
You know, it's still there, I just
is
wanted
still
to
in
make sure
place.
it's.
Yeah. At this end of the pool, proposing the Bismarckian palm kind of as a termination to the access along the length of the pool. Additional coconut palms here and here. Heavily hedged along in here. But as Jennifer said, we wanted to leave this mostly open so that you see down the length of the canal to the intercoastal. Couple of jacaranda trees back over here, another request from the owner, and then more coconut palms. And those are underplanted with daylilies and lower ground covers and shrubs. So, all in all, pretty dense landscape package for this house.
On the north elevation, what height did the plants go in? Did you say there's the fox palms?
Yeah, actually fishtail palms.
Fishtail palms.
Yeah, the fishtail palms will be 16 feet.
They go in at that?
Yes. And then the Alexander palms, we have double-headed Alexander palms that actually get planted among the fishtail palms,
Right.
and they're going in at 22 feet.
Okay. So basically the screening's there from day one?
Yeah, we're trying to block that elevation completely. Any other questions?
Thank you very much. Very
Thank you.
thorough.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So why don't we go to the proposed home? Questions? I have a series of questions, but why don't we, want to start from left to right?
I'll go
Just to start.
for any Rita, any feedback from neighbours?
Yes, the gentleman on the south called, he's not in town, I think his name is Weiss.
Okay.
And he had wanted specific explanation about the two spatial exceptions, and I explained to him what they were, and he gave me permission to say that he has no objections.
Okay.
No, I went down and walked the property, and I think I understand it, live a block north of there, so, looks good to me. Very nice plan.
I have,
Yeah, let me ask a couple of just general questions in it. The roof you said is gonna be white.
Yes, white tile.
The color of the house
Is white, is like an off-white. And then the shutters and the front door are going to be polo blue, which is like a very dark blue,
Okay.
like almost like black, but it's more blue than black. And then the door of the mudroom will also be white. So the majority of the house is gonna have, Rita has the samples, it's going to be white, and there's a slightly off-white color for the trim.
okay, well, I just wanted to just review the house quickly, which I think couldn't be a nicer design for the town. I think it's basically a one-story house with a two-story garage. It's interesting because the square footage of the garage is something like 16%, or sorry, the square footage above the garage, the second-story part, is something like 16% of the total square footage of the house. And they allow up to 70%, I believe. And then also, from the street side, it's only 22 feet wide, as you pointed out, which is only 11% of the total almost 200 foot long lot width. The second story is not in the center of the house, as is prescribed by in the manual, but I think there are 4 findings that would want us, compel us to go forward and approve the project. And the first is that the second story is only 16% of the total square footage. The second is that the two-story section of the house is almost 43 feet from the north property line, well set back. There's no impact on whoever the neighbor to the north will be. And then the aforementioned street frontage for the second story being less than 11% of the total street frontage. And the fourth reason is that the form of the house, in other words, having a one-story house with sort of a two-story side addition, resembles the form of existing single-story houses in the neighborhood with the second story above the garage. So in other words, very minimal second story. So in those 4 findings, I think we should go forward with approval of the property. Very good presentation, Jennifer.
I think that's an excellent analysis. I would agree with each of those comments.
Oh, and sorry, last thing is that the eave height was kept to 20 feet for the two-story portion of the house. That was great. Sorry.
And the landscaping.
Right.
So the combination of all of this is wonderful. I do have one question
Sure.
with regard to that north side of the house, and that's from the east to the west, that plane. It looks like it's broken up one place. I mean, it's all just one wall, and while I appreciate the profile's lower, it's
Well, yes, again, let me go to the second floor,
Just
or
right
the
there.
first floor.
There's one
Yeah, it's broken up there, but
There's
then,
one setback.
yeah, okay.
it is broken up there, but then again, towards the rear where the family room is located, then the roof steps down there, so I think that adds an additional
Yeah,
grade.
sure, that's true, yeah.
So, and then also with the chimney, I think there, you'll have, it'll protrude from the wall, so then that's kind of like another visual that will break up that elevation as well.
If you could bear with me, I have just
Yeah.
little notes to myself, they're not very well organized. On the second floor plan,
Yes,
you have the 3 bedrooms.
And then off bedroom 4 is what is called an open balcony.
Correct.
Is that a pretty big square footage?
For the open balcony?
Yeah. When you say, I mean, are they gonna put lounge chairs and umbrellas and?
No, I don't think it's meant for that. I think that they wanted to utilize the space from the downstairs, roof area because they had it. I don't think it's going to be extensive just because it's off of one of the bedrooms, and I don't believe that they have kids, so I don't think that they're gonna set up lawn chairs out there or anything like that.
Like college.
Yeah.
I need some help from town manager. What are, if any, regulations regarding having big balconies on the second floor? We don't really have anything, do we?
I mean, I think it would be just the same as if you had the master on the second floor and you had a balcony off of that. I mean, I don't know if that's any different, which I think that would get used more than a secondary bedroom, like the fourth bedroom.
Well, the reason I asked, I don't recall driving around the course, seeing a bunch of umbrellas and chairs and people partying on the second floor.
Yeah, I don't think that, again, I don't think that's the intention of it.
Seems like Rita Mann had a comment, I don't know, do you?
No,
Okay, well, take that up.
I'm thinking.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Next question is on the west elevation, as I look at it. And maybe it's just the way it's depicted.
Mhm.
But I'm not really seeing the covered terrace on the
Which one?
south side. The south side, they're near the master bedroom. I guess put it.
Well, where that railing is.
Yeah, it actually comes out.
That comes out,
Yeah.
and then you'll have like the Chippendale rail above with the columns below, and there'll be like the circular columns below
Okay.
that make up that terrace part. So you
Oh,
see
I
kind of
know,
like the
yeah,
walls
yeah,
on the
yeah.
side.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I had a hard time visualizing it, thank you.
yeah. So yeah, that will stick past the house. I think it sticks past the house maybe 8 to 10 feet. So it'll be like a nice element to kind of break up that back rear elevation.
Great. I'm almost done. I want to go to, towards the end of the presentation, the package I have here, on the east elevation, where the driveway is, the entrance or exit, anymore. It looks like there's a gate there. I'm not quite sure what that is all about.
Which one? I'm sorry.
So it would be the east elevation, and it's the small depiction of the various elevations.
Is that on
Dave, do you know-
Dave's plans?
Yeah, let me see.
Oh, no,
I
maybe
think-
this is yours.
Yeah,
Yeah. I believe there's a side gate on 2 sides, and then there's rear.
that's actually just a hedge. Just a poor depiction of a hedge, I guess.
Okay, so where do you come into the, okay, there's no gate there.
The gates are,
No. Oh, yes, there is.
There's if you look on the site plan sheet, you may be able to, I mean, that'll show you.
No, I'm concerned about the east elevation.
You know what? That's a hedge that's back against the face of the house. It's actually behind there.
Oh, okay, thank you.
We do have these, I
See,
should
it
have
looks like
mentioned.
a gate or something in here.
No, it's not.
Okay, you answered the question, thank you. Last, just technical question, on the dock,
Yes.
do we have the specifications on the dock and all that? Maybe it was
Is
just,
the dock included in this application?
No, I think the dock
The
is
dock-
like a
The dock's
separate.
the
existing.
dock's there, yeah.
Yeah.
The dock is.
I mean, I'm not even sure what they're gonna do with the dock.
Okay.
They're leaving it
Separate
as is.
application.
Yeah, but it will
okay.
be separate.
That's fine, again, it's not a, no, I think it's a wonderful house, I think it's great, and and I think back on the progression of where we started with, combining 2 lots, making a very
Mhm.
large house for the core, and having this house is gonna be wonderful, so.
Okay, great.
Great job.
Thank you. Anything else? Thanks.
No other questions? Any questions from the public? Comments? May I have a motion?
Yes. Well, there's quite a few motions here, but first of all, motion to recommend approval of demolition permit. We have to do each one individually?
Yes, please. Do we have a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Mr. Murphy? Mr. Rubini?
Aye.
Mr. Kent?
Yes?
Chairman Lyons?
Yes.
And then secondly, motion to recommend approval of special exception to permit a 30-foot waterfront rear setback as allowed by section 70-75J and 1.
Second.
Mr. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Rubini?
Aye.
Mr. Kent?
Yes.
Chairman Lyons?
Yes.
Thirdly, a motion to recommend approval of a special exception for 238 feet of covered unenclosed area that exceeds the maximum FAR per section 70-72B2.
I'll second that.
Does this require a deed restriction to,
Yeah, that. probably
It's in the 11.3 recommendation, number
oh,
1.
okay, I'm sorry, yeah, I've never seen that now, thank you.
Mr. Murphy?
Yes.
Mr. Rubini?
Aye.
Mr. Kent?
Aye.
Chairman Lyons?
Yes. Mr. Kent, before you go to the next motion, I have a question regarding the electric service lines shall be buried. Again, sort of a technical question, what about cable and phone? What is that supposed to mean, cable and phone?
Actually, they'll all be buried.
I assumed that was the case, okay.
It's just a standard clause that we have, technically, for other reasons.
Do we need to add the cable and,
Okay?
Utilities,
yeah, why don't we add the cable and phone?
Just make it detailed, yeah.
just utilities.
Okay. Okay, fourth, recommendation to recommend approval of a level 3 architectural/site plan review to permit the construction of a partial 2-story, single-family Georgian style dwelling with an attached 4-car garage consisting of 8,560 square feet and a swimming pool with the following conditions. 1, prior to issuance of occupancy, the owner of the property shall prepare and record a deed restriction which shall provide that all roof projection areas shall remain unenclosed as per approval of the special exception for as long as the structure is in existence or exceeds the maximum FAR. The electrical service lines and all utilities shall be buried. Any minor modifications in the landscape plan shall be submitted to the town manager for review and approval, and any major modification shall be brought back to the ARPB for review and approval prior to commencement of landscaping.
Second that.
Mr. Murphy?
Done.
Mr. Rubini?
Aye.
Mr. Kent?
Yes.
Chairman Lyons?
Yes. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Very nice.
It's a very nice house.
See, when you come, it's much easier.
So you guys want me from now on?
Make sure you relay that message.
You're welcome anytime.
Now, look what we have to look at.
Yeah.
You're gonna leave all those, right?
North Carlson.
Yes.
Right,
Just
Ron.
leave it right there. Be
Yeah.
fine.
I bet you that.
We were just missing that one piece to finish our,
Yeah.
Needs to ride
Do you need me to leave
red
the
rock.
ones too well,
Yeah.
or
All
do you want
those
me just to
things
email
with
you
the
the
van.
PowerPoint?
You see these people going crash and break and shit.
Okay.
whatever you've done.
Okay, no problem.
And it'll be here then for your next meeting.
Okay.
You wanna know what you're reading?
No, that's all right, just leave, we'll be taking it out.
Okay.
Maintenance men will be taking it out.
It's like
We need the IT person.
Yeah, it's,
Oh, really?
Do we have a problem, Houston?
I mean, the The mouse
You're
is
smart
moving on the
as I am,
screen,
so
but I
let's
can't
see
get
how
the
you
mouse
do.
on
Now, that's an Arches National Park.
Where?
Trying to
Arches.
control.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Oh, there. maybe
I
it's
loved
on
it.
this.
Yeah.
I have it, oh.
Beautiful.
In the spring, when I was living in Colorado, everybody got in their trucks and cars with their bikes and they went out that way and rode there. But you couldn't wait that some warm weather with no snow.
Where in Colorado is that? Is it near,
I think we should.
Well, I'm forgetting now.
what's in there, Rita?
Arches is,
It says that I can't inject it, but.
near, it's in Utah, actually.
Yeah, it is Utah.
Just across the border. And it's,
I don't know.
near that town that starts with a K. Caleb or something like that.
Oh, okay. That's beautiful.
Is it only the three?
I wanna start here and go down to
here.
Should be back.
This is a double coffee one.
Someone must have done it.
See you, Bucker.
We can put it in it just to say.
Yeah, let's put it down. Stick around, man.
She called him Bucker.
I know,
I wonder if that's what they call him.
Anything.
I didn't wanna go there.
We want
this to get over quickly, don't we?
Absolutely.
Should we just restart the computer?
It's fine, it's just it's already on there and he couldn't figure out why, because he didn't save it to it.
We can wait till next month.
Rita, your
That's for kids, right?
geography is right on.
No,
Just
not
over
like
the
that.
border of Colorado. I
Yeah.
had a sense it wasn't in Colorado.
It's not there.
Oh, it's because of. I don't know why I keep.
So is it full of arches like
Don't
that?
do yet.
And different designs. They aren't all arches, but there are a lot of various arches from different angles, and some of them you have to hike to.
know any of this stuff. I have young
Nice place.
Looks like it's worth visiting.
Yes, when I was there, it was a national monument, now it's a national park.
Huh.
You should be able to either do the brown arrow or you
Oh,
can.
wow. Oh, cool.
Ready?
Good.
Oh, I guess we gotta get off Arches.
I had to get off.
It's pretty, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really neat.
Okay.
Good morning, Bill Wietzma, architect and agent for the Hansons at 540 Middle Road. There we go. The Hansons came to me and they live in a very nice house over in Middle Road, but they have absolutely no outdoor covered area to speak of. They have this basically an 8-foot covered patio, which isn't adequate enough for them to do the outdoor living that they really want to enjoy while they're down in Florida, like from Germany, and when they come down here, they want to have this outdoor living room kind of space, and they were never able to achieve it with what they have. You see they have a covered area that's approximately 8 feet by 38 feet with a trellis that's attached to it. And they've asked me to look at study a way of making that larger. And so we've actually done a very simple approach, is to take the area where the, let's see if we can, does this work there? There we go. The area right in this area, in here, this is where the existing covered area is, it's 8 feet. We just simply extended it out an additional 8 feet to 16 feet. And by doing that, I mean, it's not as simple as just saying, okay, we're gonna add on to it. Because the structure, the way the structure's set up, we really have to take the one that's existing down and rebuild it. And so we've just taken from a planning standpoint, taking the 8-foot deep patio and extended it out another 8 feet to make it 16 feet. And here's these are 2 existing doors in this area right here. And what we're proposing to do is put a new door in here that's centered on the patio. And then this is as you can see, it's a nice outdoor living room now. And we're actually proposing putting in little drop-down screens they won't be down all the time, only when it's buggy. You push a button and all of a sudden these screens drop down. You open your doors and you have this delightful outdoor space that's tied to the rest of the house. And very concerned about the light quality inside the house, making it too dark. So what we're proposing to do is actually this is a plan of the second floor balcony. That right now the balcony is out 8 feet, now it's going to be out 16 feet. Not that the balcony, again, is going to get used very much, but it's basically a roof for the loggia down below. Proposing to put in two, basically 3 foot by 6 foot skylights. And these aren't the bubble type skylights that you normally see that everybody hates. These will be, I use these in another project I did down in Key Biscayne. They're actually a flat sheet of laminated glass that sit on a 6-inch curb. So you'll never see the bulbs from the outside. It's perfectly flat. We just slightly tilt them a 1/4 inch foot to drain water off of them. And what that does is basically, we use a low E glass to minimize the heat gain coming through it. But it just looks like a hole in the ceiling. It's really quite beautiful. And this is what the reflective ceiling plan would be like inside that space. So it's a simple addition. We're here also because the house is pretty much maxed out in square footage. And we did some calculations based on the old plans of the house and our new, we verified the square footage of the house, and we're able to achieve this, what it was, 200 square feet of additional space by requesting a special exception for the additional outdoor space based on the 50% of what's there. So if there are any questions?
The flat skylight, is that load bearing? I mean, like, people have a.
It's laminated glass. I mean, it's hurricane resistant. You can probably jump on it. Nothing's going to happen.
It doesn't have a railing around it or anything, it just.
Not necessary. You can't fall through it. You can't go through with a sledgehammer. It's strong.
I like it, I think it's kind of neat,
This is a terrific thing. It's not going to impact it's going to have minimal additional impact. I mean, it's basically what's there, just out another 8 feet. It's fully screened from the house to the west.
And it cleans up. It's kind of a mess back there now with the round columns and the trellis extending out. It looks like it's just been added on to
Looks
that.
like it was kind of cobbled on.
Yeah.
As an afterthought.
And really, I'm sure it was like, how do we make this work,
And what they have now really isn't usable. I mean, it's too narrow.
Right, and these people
Not
live,
deep enough, I should say.
they live for the outdoors.
But
The Hansons, very nature-minded as far as being outside.
well, if not any questions, I sense none, and I have a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Second?
No, sorry.
That's the way to do it.
I like it. Oh, there we go.
I like guy moves.
I like it. Okay. I would like to make a motion to recommend approval of a special exception to allow 247 square feet of covered, unenclosed area that exceeds the maximum permitted floor area ratio of the demolition permit to remove existing pool, screen, enclosure, and all windows.
Second.
Well, I really messed that one
Yeah,
up. Sorry, you did a good job, I did a bad job.
I was editing it way too long ago.
Thank you.
Did we miss something?
Totally, but they know what it is.
Perfect.
Oh, sorry. I just had one. I thought that they said that the pool was staying. Is the pool in
Yes,
state?
pool stay.
Oh, did I read this wrong? A demolition permit to remove existing
Pool
pool.
screen.
Oh, pool screen enclosure. and all
Yeah,
that.
it's the
Okay,
common,
there we go.
yeah, it's the common.
Cool, okay.
Yeah, I was
There
editing
is
it.
no pool screen
No,
measure.
There's no pool screen.
Yeah. Because I knew it wasn't the
Why
pool.
don't you just
And I sort of,
exclude that
okay, and I took out the
fragment
ration.
of a sentence?
Yeah. Anyway, should we have another attempt?
Yes.
So essentially, hang on.
Just stop at the period.
Stop at the period.
Yeah, okay.
Committed floor area ratio period.
Yeah, the editing got so far and.
You just take out the.
Yeah, okay, here we
It's
go.
on the agenda.
It
It is floor area ration on here, but
Yeah, I put ratio, and I got ratio into the ongoing edit.
Yeah, Mr. Randolph suggested you read what's on the part up there at the top, special exception to allow 2.7.
Yeah,
Look at that.
I'll just read up to the period. Okay, yep, that's what I'm going with, okay. I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of a special exemption to allow 247 square feet of covered unenclosed area that exceeds the maximum permitted floor area ratio.
Second.
Mr. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Rubini?
Aye.
Mr. Kent?
aye.
Chairman Lyons?
Yes.
I'd like to further make a second motion to recommend approval of a level 3 architectural site plan based on a finding that the proposed addition of a new single-story loggia on an existing single-family Gulfstream Bermuda 2-story dwelling meets the minimum intent of the design manual and applicable review standards with the following condition. 1. Prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, the owner of the property shall prepare and record a deed restriction which shall provide that all roof projection areas shall remain unenclosed as per approval of the special exception for as long as the structure is in existence or exceeds the maximum FAR.
May I ask a technical question, sorry? This is an existing home, doesn't it have a CO already?
COCC is used
Interchangeable.
interchangeably, so it's the same idea.
Okay,
But this change, this addition will have to go through final inspection.
okay, thank you. You made a motion, I don't have a question.
I think it's seconded.
Stan seconds.
You ready for a vote? Mr. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Rubini?
Aye.
Mr.
Aye.
Kent?
Aye.
Chairman Lyons?
Yes.
We handled that pretty smoothly.
Can I
for
just
you,
say, Bill,
Bill.
Bill,
You did a much better job than we did.
Well, Rita's always pushing me, I gotta tell you.
And that's rare that I do a better job.
can I just say, you started it, went through Paul and it ended up here. It's like, whatever you.
So 2 and done, are we done?
Yeah. Let's go. You're reminding
Gentlemen,
us
thank
of
you
our
very much.
pollution.
Thank you for the comments last meeting too, Bill.
I quit while we're ahead.
Okay, so I think we're to other business. And, well, I should say we're on Roman numeral 7, continued discussion from May 28, 2015 as it relates to reduction of percentage allowed for second story and placement of the second story. The whole subject of two-story homes. I think Mr. Kent has a recommendation, proposal, suggestion.
Well, he has some proposals, I put them on the screen. Let's see.
Let's hope that works again. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, so what I have is a two-part proposal. Oh, I don't know what. Time's off. Nice scratch.
I'm trying to bring around, let's see.
Well, basically what this is, just so brief overview, is continuing on and incorporating what Malcolm suggested we do, this is Skip working, as you know, on this, the town commission's recommendation to somehow, well, reduce or encourage, people not to
Disincentivize
build
two-story houses.
disincentivize two-story houses. But if there is one built, at least keep it within, minimize the second story, the impact of the second story, especially on the street and the neighbors. And so what we have already is
I think, let's start with the premise, and I want to see if this is correct. From the last meeting, I think it was determined by the Architecture Review and Planning Board that having disincentives for second stories was not doable, practical, etc. And so now we're taking the next step to say if we're going to have two-story single-family homes, that how can we contain the impact of that second story?
Yes. I think that's a very.
Is that a fair progression?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
And Mr. Thatcher also outlined the financial repercussions of limiting FAR. Let's see.
While you're focusing on that, let me add a couple other comments. Mr. Kent, I noted in the last meeting that let me read what Mr. Kent said, and I agreed with him. That in the absence of having specific quantitative regulations, there is a language in the code that gives the board the discretion to decide if a design is in keeping with the character of the district. And I thought the application on Polo Drive illustrated that very well, where the central, where the form of the house, the second, we're supposed to have central massing. In this case, we did not. But the architect dealt with it very well for the 4 or 5 reasons that you cited. And I think that was a good solution, and we didn't simply stick to, well, central massing, but use judgment, and the architect gave the board the opportunity to see the merits of how they shifted the massing to one side of the house. I thought it was a good example of how the code should work and how it should be implemented by the board.
Yes. And I just wanted to compliment everybody, you know, in the town, Rita, Bill, everybody who reviews these plans, because that wasn't, I mean, I feel that the plan is very much in keeping with the character of Gulfstream, because there are a lot of houses, and I actually brought pictures in, of houses that are single-story houses with this 2-story addition off to the side. And I think that should be, and actually I have a proposal to for large 2-story portions. In other words, when we get about 50, 60, you know, into the larger part, you can't do it on the side. But you know that their proposal was, what was the number? It was something like 16%. You know, which is in keeping with other. There are a lot of houses in town that have a guest house above the garage, where you know it's something less than 20% of the total square footage, where it works to put and also the applicant also reduced the eave height to 20 feet, so you don't have something towering over. I think what we just approved was really an excellent design, and it is, and it shows that being, you know, that we have to craft this so that to allow for small second stories, which is why I propose a sort of a second, where I propose to give architects flexibility. Well, I'll go through it in here. But anyway, let's see. So, where we got to last recommendations to the Gulfstream Code for two-story homes in Core and Place au Soleil and North and South districts. Let's see. In the May meeting, we discussed ways to reduce the appearance of mass, and basically, so that here are the proposals that I would make based on the last meeting, and also the input from the commissioners. Is first of all, presently the setback from the street is 30 feet for a one-story house or a two-story house. Now there has to be articulation in the front and the use of step backs. However, I think it was an excellent recommendation that the mayor and the town commission made, is that if somebody wants to build a two-story house, that the two-story section of the house has to be set back from the street 35 feet. And I think that's important for two reasons. A, because it reduces the effect of the two-story coming out, you know, the massiveness, the appearance of massiveness. And the second thing is if we're going to allow architects to go into the discouraged range. Right now, the preferred range was stops at 21 feet. I think going into the discouraged range, which I believe stops at 23 feet, will, you know, involve, you know, something that's somewhat overbearing on the street. So I think that the commissioner's recommendation to go an additional 5 feet back on the second-story portion of the home, the first-story portion only has to go to 30 feet, but the second story to 35 feet. I think that is an excellent recommendation, and I would hope that we make that part of our recommendation to the commissioners for to limit the effect of the second floor. The second piece would be to establish a side story setback, something that's definitive, not in sort of that general, well, we have to have a centrally located second floor. I think what we want to do is give architects a window, a second-story window from the front elevation. Say you have to come in X number of square feet, X number of linear feet, and then you have for the second-story window. So the manual currently limits second-story square footage to 70% of first floor. I don't think there's a problem there. But there are no guidelines for linear square footage across the front elevation. And my recommendation is that we establish one of two solutions. Either supply a fixed number for the second story setback, i.e. it must be at least 10 feet in from the first story walls. In other words, so that on the front elevation you have and what it would involve is saying this is what
Scroll
has.
down a little bit more.
Oh, that's it. That's as far as it goes. But
No, I meant, don't you have numbers above yours?
oh, I do. Right. Yes.
I don't see it.
They're sort of in between the top. Well, basically, this is sort of continuing on. So I think we have two options here. And Mr. Wiesman, in the last meeting, recommended having at least a 10-foot setback for the first story. In other words, here's your first story width. He recommended having at least a 10-foot setback for the wall of the second story. And that's one way we could adopt this, Or what I sort of like too is Mr. Murphy's suggestion of specifying the same way the lot width determines the setbacks for the structure itself. What we do is take that, basically that exact same language and say, okay, lot width, leave the lot width, everything the same, and just adopt a second piece, which would say the second story, the setback for the second story is calculated by multiplying the width of the first story from here to here by 30%. So if the first story is 100 feet across, the setbacks would be 30 feet.
I'm sorry, I don't know. Could you say that again, please?
Okay, so the
The linear
The linear
length
footage,
of the structure
let's
is.
say, just for argument's sake, let's say it's 100 feet. I
Okay.
mean, it could be 50 feet, it could be 120 feet.
Okay,
But
okay.
basically saying that the linear footage, just for example, to make it simple, is the same way if you have a 100-foot lot, the setbacks are 30% of that. So the house has to come in 30 feet, and no side can be closer than 15 feet. So if you have a 200-foot lot with 60 foot, the setbacks would be 60 feet, but no side can be closer than 15 feet from the property line. So what I would recommend is that we say that the second story can't be any more, the second story setbacks have to be 30% of the total house width, and no wall can be closer than 10 feet from here. So sort of the same thing as the first story setback from the property, in which we say it's 30% but no more than 15 feet. What I recommend is to give the architects a nice window, but still allow for a 10-foot setback, is say that the second story can be 30%, well, it can be 70% of the first story with the minimum of width, and the closest the setback would be is 10 feet. So it would just mirror what we already have in place for the property setbacks. So what we're doing is establishing a window for the architects to work within when they design the second story. And that's pretty much it. I mean, Mr. Wiesma, he went from side to side, but there are houses that have a smaller second story and say they only want to build this much, and there are a lot of examples of new houses of that in town. But the architect can work anywhere within this window, so to give the architect flexibility. So, and I think it would mirror nicely with what we already have in place, describing the property setbacks. So that is my recommendation for this second story side setback.
Could you put it into one or two sentences to include the idea of linear feet and minimum of 10?
Yes, I put it all in here. Let's see here. As a matter of fact, option B, well, I proposed two options. One is just to have a 10-foot setback, as Mr. Wiesma suggested. The second option,
10-foot setback from the first floor.
from the first floor. The second option would be based on 30% of the house width. So that's why I say option B dovetails perfectly with the calculation of the property's side yard setback. The calculation would be made in the same way as the side yard setback. So the setback for the first story equals lot width times 30% with a minimum setback of 15 feet. That exists. What we say for the second story is, to address the second story, setback for the second story equals first story width times 30% with a minimum setback of 10 feet. And that would allow the architect to shift the second story within a broad range to give the architects maximum flexibility. And the other thing it would do is it would keep, right now, we don't have a number that we can give the architects. In other words, we say, currently, the second story, or the house can't be any closer than 30 feet from the road. This would, with the 15-foot minimum that we have in place for the first story, for the house to be in from the side property line, plus an additional 10 feet, would ensure that the second story is no closer than 25 feet from the adjacent property on the side. So I think it would get the side property second story setbacks to line up pretty close with the front story setbacks. Of course, they would be allowed to go 5 feet out further to the side, but it would only be 25 feet instead of 30 feet. But I don't think that would be bad. And then there's one more piece that I'd like to add to address situations where people want to build a second. They're taking an existing single-story house and they have a garage and they want to build a guest room above the garage or just add space above the garage. But the garages tend to be on the sides of the house. And then today we had an example of a new house with a very minimal second story. And I think for small second stories, and I did bring pictures, that we want to allow people to do something, a small second story, because I'd much rather have houses in town that are mostly one story with just a small 2-story section. So to encourage that, allow people to build a 20-foot high 2-story that is only 15 feet from the side property line. And I did bring some pictures of houses in town. This is a house at Middle Road. It was a 1-story house. The second story over on the right was added. It's probably somewhere around 300 square feet, or about maybe a little over 10% of the total property. That's another view of the second story on Middle Road, and you can see it has a fairly minimal impact on the neighbor to the east in this case. There's another, this is another house. This is on Palm Way, where once again it was a single-story house where the second story was added above the garage for a guest house. And because most of the house is 1 story, the impact of that second story, even though it's not centrally located, is minimal. Here's a house that Mr. Wiesma built. It was built as a 2-story house, but I just wanted to show that having those ample setbacks on the side really minimize the effect of the second story. By having these large setbacks on the side, it minimizes the impact. And this would easily fit within the rule that we'd be creating, so it does give people flexibility to build a 2-story house. This is, Stan's. Stan's house. This is a...
And twice, 2 previous was my mother's previous house.
Oh.
That had the second story addition put on it. So, I'm pretty familiar with both properties.
But once again, having a small second story addition really has a minimal impact on the property overall. I mean, this is quite a large house. I just took a picture of the second story, and in this case, it's set well back, but certainly, once again, it's less than 20% of the total square footage of the house, minimal impact. There are 3 houses on Banyan Road. Now, from the vantage point that I took the photograph, I mean, this is about the maximum impact a second story would have, a small second story. The rest of the house is all 1 story. Here's another case, the house next door, where the second story addition was done over the garage. And then next to that house, just to the west, is yet another house where a second story was built above the garage. It's a little bit wider because there's a staircase going up on the left, but it is set back. But this is in all these cases, the impact of that second story is minimal. So that's why I would like to see that we do allow the flexibility for somebody to do a minimal second story. In other words, less than 20% of the first floor, but to allow some flexibility for the architects to put a small second story on. Anyway, I mean, just to allow for these things to be done, because as I was talking to Bill and Rita yesterday, and they were both very concerned about giving, what do you do when somebody comes in with an application and they want to put a small second story over a garage or something like that. So I think this is, so I think we have to allow for these 2 things. I think that these proposals are fairly minimal from the point of view of codifying them. The language is pretty simple, and I think it just gives the architects something firm to work with, because it's just right now central massing is so ambiguous that it really doesn't give. It's not fair to anybody. It's not fair to the applicants. It's not fair to the staff, the ARPB, the commissioners. It just can be judged as so open. I think this gives the architects, it's in keeping with the town, and it gives everybody a way to quantify what needs to be done. And then keep that, in place with the central massing and everything like that. And I think we have a neat little package to ensure that we're not gonna have two-story block structures or second stories that are all the way over, massing on the street or massing on a neighbor's house to allow for property. And also, and the third thing is, that we'll keep a two-story, right now, I mean, somebody could say, make an argument that we can build 2 stories 20 feet off the street on the side. The setback in the front is 30 feet, but on the side, the minimum is 20 feet. So this ensures that the second story portion will stay at least 25 feet off the street. So it's fairly, I tried to take my thought and make it as concise as possible. Now, of course, we want to meet with the fellow who does Marty Minor.
Could you go back to the 20% thing on the, I didn't quite follow that.
Oh, yes, okay. So let's see. So I propose 3 things. One is an additional 5-foot setback for 2-story sections of the house from the front. The second is establishing side yard setbacks for the second story. The third is establish your section in the code for second story structures with FARs less than 20% of the total FAR. And then we reviewed the number of small structures in the district's under review. And basically, to give architects greater flexibility and to encourage single-story homes with very modest second stories, I would recommend we create an additional section to address second-story structures where the second-story FAR is less than 20% of the total FAR. And that section would allow placement of second stories outside the setbacks established by, for large second stories. In other words, greater than 20% of FAR. We have a minimum setback of 25 feet from any roadway, and that the maximum eave height could be 20 feet for these.
Can you go to the heading of this
Yes.
language again? Establish a section for second stories with FAR less than 20% of total.
Or maybe it could be second stories with square footage less than 20% of the total FAR. So in other words, if you had a 4,000 square foot house, the maximum size the second story could be is 800 square feet.
But that's the section that would define what you spoke to earlier, which were those small second stories over garages, right?
Right, and whether it's somebody who has an existing home, I mean, it just allows, because if we enact the second suggestion, which is having the step back based on the total width of the house, it wouldn't allow for somebody to build a second story over the garage. In other words, a small.
Maybe the language of number 3 needs to be modified.
Tightened up a little bit, yeah.
Include garages specifically, or guest house above garages.
That's an interesting thing, because you could have a house with the 1-story house with the central, how most Gulfstream houses have like a central piece, and then they tend to have wings sort of on the side. I mean, I don't know if it would be terrible if somebody wanted to take one of those side wings and build out.
I don't
Or
think
even both of the side wings built up, so long as there was setbacks and you're breaking the face of the,
They probably wouldn't get inside that 20% rule if they wanted to do both.
If they would, yeah, if they wanted to do both sides,
I think it gets to.
So I think the 20% rule, we can make it 15% or whatever. I mean, that particular house that was just presented to us is 16%, but I thought 20% was a good.
Okay,
what is the ailment that we're trying to cure?
Well, I see, this puts it in the category where it's not within that 70% rule of linear foot.
Yes.
yeah, I think what Mr. Ken is trying to accomplish is he has these 2 buckets. One is for
Yep.
the bigger second story, and then a smaller second, and smaller. And I think that resonates with me. And I don't think we should think of it as garage apartments. I think we should think of it as just a small second story that doesn't have to be centrally located.
And it would encourage people to not tear down a one-story house. If somebody's like, well, I can't build on because there's no more room on the first story, ground room. And it would allow them to do, accomplish a guest room or whatever it is that they want to do over a garage, allow them to expand without raising the house.
So the one dimension that we haven't addressed, you addressed the front of the house.
Right,
Correct.
in other words, the front setback from the street, or
You addressed the side of the house.
the size of the house.
Sides. But on the rear, and that's a place that I always seem to get preoccupied. Because often in the rear is where people have those social activities, pools, loggias, and so on. And what you don't want is your neighboring properties to have a big second story, or one that goes to the back, that's looking over whatever you choose to be doing in your really usable outdoor living space. And so I'm a little concerned that, you push everything from the front to the back. And while I appreciate that when people drive down the road, we don't want a massive building overwhelming you. On the other hand, if you're sitting out by your pool, you wanna read your newspaper, I don't wanna look at Joe up there, So help me with how you deal with the back. Do you think that setbacks are adequate
Well, I must say,
on the second story?
just from what, that's an interesting question. It's just, it behooves people, people like to have big backyards. As a matter of fact, that's one reason why people say they want to build a two-story house, is because they don't want their, as a matter of fact, when we took the setbacks, the front yard setback, when the town was built, before the code, the houses that were built to 35-foot front setback. When the code was written, that was brought up to 30 feet. Then, in the 90s, it actually came up to 25 feet. What happened was, and that was to allow the architects freedom to give more room in the back, which is precisely what you're saying. In other words, you don't want to push the house back too far, because that makes it so you can't have a big backyard. But what happened was, when we went to 25 feet, there was no room left for landscaping. In other words, all you had room for was really, a little teeny bit of landscaping, and then you had the house, a driveway and then the house. So 25 feet wasn't enough. So then it was pushed back to 30 feet, just to give enough room for a driveway, some landscaping, get the house further off the street. Now, with a two-story house, people want to maximize their backyard. People like to have a pool and nice yard. So I don't know how we would address the backyard setback, but that's a very good question, and we can certainly look at that for the next,
I'm just thinking out loud, because now you've addressed the backyard, the privacy of the backyard to some degree by the setbacks on the side, because but it's still protruding into the back of the property, because right now the second floor setback is 20 feet?
We don't have any numbers, so that's the problem.
Well,
No, the
if
rear,
it's flush, the rear setback in these three districts is 20 foot.
Yeah.
First floor
Oh, I
setback.
think
From
meant the
the
side
front-
setback, sorry.
Well,
Yeah, from the perimeter. Or
From the property line.
Yeah. But that doesn't get over, if you like, the massing potentially at the back, which I think you're talking about, Paul, that someone could be there and looking 20 feet, that,
I mean, it's only 20 feet off the back line, in the second story.
Well, these lots are, the depth of the lots are pretty small to begin with. And if you increase the front on the second to 35, you have 30 in the front,
Yeah, you're right.
and then 20 in the rear. You're gonna be creating some kind of perhaps a strange look.
I always get concerned about unintended consequences, you know, you start constraining.
Well, that's my point is, if you look at, one plane, you have to look at all four sides.
Well,
The whole, holistically, and, I agree with you, if you start pushing it back from the rear, then it really gets to be an issue, but the problem is, as you push it on the side and the front, then you have it in the back, but the back is where you want privacy. I
But
think.
aren't you trying to avoid the appearance of mass from the street? And I'm not sure you're really ever going to be able to address avoiding having a second story overlooking someone's backyard or even looking into someone's window. And the way we've dealt with that in other communities is by screening. And that's the way we deal with it here too, is
Yes, true.
by screening, to the extent that the neighbors aren't having to look into someone else's property or having these folks look into their property. So I'm not sure you're going to be able to do both, i.e. avoid the appearance of mass from the front where everybody sees it,
Right.
and still create a situation where you don't have people looking down into somebody's back.
No, and that's helpful. I just want to be sure that we address all aspects of the
Yes.
question.
No, it's a good, it's a good point.
And one other thing I just wanted to add to that is that, you know, really, I mean, this is sort of based on what we already have here. I mean, I just wanted to take the character of the community and address it and just tighten up the second story issue. But because if you look at all the second story houses that are built, most of them are already built. The second story is already additional 5 feet, at least 5 feet back from, I mean, there tend to be, you know, the house that Bill Weisman built, all those houses, the two-story section already is pushed back an additional 5 feet. So really, it's not, it's already it already represents what we have in the neighborhood. The only place we don't have that is on these two-story garage additions, second-story garage additions.
I personally don't see anything wrong with the setbacks as they are presented, including the concept of an additional 5 foot on the front. In these three districts, there is right-of-way that's between their property line and the roadway. And I don't necessarily agree that we need an additional 5 foot on the front. I think the setbacks as defined are adequate. I like the quantitative concept added to our 70% rule of the second story. So with the adding the 10-foot minimum as compared to a percentage, it does quantify what we want to see. It does control the sides and streets, even on a corner, that setback or step back, and gives still, I think, flexibility to the architect. But the additional setbacks, I think is problematic.
The front yard setback.
Yeah, I think the setbacks as we have them defined are adequate.
No, again, his question is, are you only speaking to the front or the sides as well?
I'm saying all setbacks as defined
You're
are
fine.
fine, so I don't think he did mention an additional 5 foot in the front, so I guess just speaking to that issue, I don't agree with that.
At the ground level, though.
But not at the ground level, only in the two-story. In other words,
No,
it would-
I don't.
it would remain.
You're saying the
Well,
setbacks at the ground level you're happy with, and then
Yeah,
potentially the scenario that was presented for the second story.
I think I remember comments from architects that that requirement of, you probably remember me, but that requirement of this required step back on the second story in the front elevation doesn't allow for articulation and creativity as it relates to the design and fit. Does anybody remember
Well,
an
I think-
architect saying that?
Yes, I do, and, you know,
Didn't we
cookie
do it
cutter, wedding cake, you know, all those kind of things. But we have the dimension of architectural style, form, and then we have the issue of the mass of a second story imposing upon the neighborhood.
Yeah, but
our neighbors. And that's what I'm concerned is that, you don't want this house that is adjacent to you sort of just pouring over you when you,
And
Well,
for
don't you have that
Front
addressed already
elevation.
by limiting the second story to a
Right.
percentage of the total?
well, it's only 70%.
yeah, that's quite a bit, I mean,
Why did you decide at the meeting, at last meeting, not to disincentivize two-story houses? The way I would disincentivize two-story houses, I would require, for instance, if it's gonna be 2 stories, a 35-foot setback, period, not 30 and 35. If they're gonna go 2 stories, I'd make them have a 35-foot front setback, and if they're gonna go 2 stories, I'd make them have a 20-foot side yard setback instead of 15. Apparently you considered that at the last meeting and decided not to do it that way.
Well, let's see, in the last meeting, we considered reducing the second story from 70% of the first story to 60% of the first story. But it's just, I think where we got to in that meeting was that that's not enough of a disincentive for somebody not to build a 2-story house. In other words, if you go from 70 to 60, people are just gonna put 60% upstairs.
but that,
That's,
also that blanket rule that Mr. Randolph just mentioned doesn't do anything to control the location of that second story portion, and you could still end up, unless you catch it, a large mass on the street side that is a block.
it's a block, yes, exactly.
This concept, I kinda like. I think it quantitative, that it gives an additional quantitative aspect to it as it relates to the front elevation, which absolutely controls and assures that there'll be no block on any roadway or on the side of a neighbor.
I'm sorry, what does?
The recommendation.
Yeah,
So, I
Because-
heard you something earlier, now, that's why I want to be sure.
because if you, the 70% of FAR in the second story and the 70% of linear foot, to me, aligns itself pretty well. And that 70-foot quantitatively on the front elevation forces the sides to come in. And yet gives them flexibility, another 5 foot or 10
Yeah, it
foot.
provides the window where they've got some
Yes.
creativity.
And that window does not allow for a block on any side.
I'd like to go back to Mr. Randall's suggestion. We started addressing the second story, and I become sort of one-dimensional. I'm thinking just the second story setbacks. And my thought was on the first story, the setbacks were fine today, but I'm not opposed to your suggestion. Let's keep it simple. You want to do a second story, have the setbacks greater on a house, both on the first and second, and let the architects decide how they arrange the second story on top of the first story. Always with, as Weitzman stated, he suggested that the plane be broken by possibly limiting the maximum size of any wall plane with a break, blah, blah, blah. Somehow break it, but you wouldn't necessarily have to have the second story back from the first story 10 feet or 5 feet or whatever.
Well, this is the only thing that's interesting, is I think that the whole plane concept is a little bit too complicated, because then you have to have architects come in with this, okay, this block is, X number of square feet. That's a very complicated way to address things, and I just think it won't lend itself to good architecture. The reason that I feel so strongly about the second story, in other words, for a 1-story house, don't change anything. For the 1-story section of the house.
Right.
But for the second story, the houses in Gulfstream are already built with that additional 5 feet setback for the second story. In other words, if you drive around and look at all the 2-story houses, the second stories already are back at 35 feet.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, I don't know how many feet,
No,
they are,
because
but most of them come in at the sides.
Well, the sides, there are
You're
two,
talking about the front elevation?
the front elevation,
Or the first floor has wings and the second,
right, and the wings project out
Right.
to the street. And then the wings always come out, so then they step back, and the second story is already at 35 feet or more. See, that's the reason that I suggest we just put it in there, just so that the houses continue to be the same as what's already built.
but let's go back to one of the, I believe, an objective of incentivizing the construction of a two-story building. If you said it,
Oh, disincentivizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
if you stated that the setback